The truth is a heavy thing to carry when your legs are too weak to support it. In the village of Otumopo, they say a child born broken is a curse whispered by the earth. But Ada's true curse wasn't her twisted limb, it was her eyes. She was a girl who saw the end of things before they even began. While others looked at the world and saw life, Ada could bend her body, look through the gap of her knees, and see the exact moment the light would leave a person's eyes. She didn't just see the future, she saw the inevitable, captured in an upside-down world where the sky is blood and every heartbeat is a countdown. To know how someone will die is to be the loneliest person alive, especially when the people you want to save are the ones who wish you were dead. The world is a masterpiece of lies, but it cannot hide its secrets from a girl who views it from the dead. Ada entered the market of Otumopo as she always did, to the rhythm of thump, drag, thump, drag. She was 19, but in the eyes of the villagers, she was still the refuse left at the forest edge 2 decades ago. She carried her bananas with a spine of iron, her face a mask of stone to hide the hunger for a kind word that she knew would never come. "Look," a woman hissed, pulling her toddler away. "The bent one comes to bring the sour luck." Ada kept her eyes on the ground. She didn't want to see them. If she didn't look at them, she wouldn't be tempted to see them. But the pain in her hip was a jagged tooth gnawing at her nerves. By noon, the agony was a fire that only a deep folding stretch could douse. She tucked herself behind a cluster of baobab crates and leaned forward. She let her head hang between her ankles, the world flipping into that terrifying inverted clarity. The market colors shifted into a bruised electric violet, and there, walking through the gap of her legs, was Amadi, the village carpenter. In the straight world, Amadi was a man of muscle and arrogance. In the upside-down world, Ada saw a shadow coiled around his neck like a serpent. She saw the future play out in a flickering instant, a ladder sliding on wet mud, Amadi's body twisting in the air, and the sickening crunch of his skull meeting the sharp edge of a stone trough. She saw his daughter screaming over a father who would never wake up. Ada snapped upright, her vision blurring. The straight world rushed back sunny, dusty, and oblivious. Amadi was standing right there, adjusting a beam, laughing as he mocked a passing beggar. Her heart didn't just beat, it bruised her ribs. She hated Amadi. He had led the mob that burned her shelter 2 rains ago, but the image of his daughter's grief was a hook in her soul. Thump, drag, thump, drag. She forced herself into his space. "Amadi, the clouds are coming. The earth will turn to grease. Do not climb that ladder today. If you do, you will not see tomorrow." The laughter in the market died. Amadi looked down at her, his eyes filling with a dark, familiar malice. He didn't see a girl trying to save him. He saw a freak trying to claim power over his life. "You see my death, do you?" Amadi stepped into her personal space, his shadow towering over her. "You, a creature who can barely walk, think you can tell a man how he will stand? Or are you just angry that the gods gave you a snake for a leg and gave me strength?" Maduka, the high priest, glided forward in his blindingly white robes. He was the straight man, the arbiter of all that was correct in Otumopo. "She plays with shadows," Maduka declared, his voice a smooth, lethal caress. "She wants you to fear the dark so you will turn to her for light. But look at her. Does the light live in something so twisted?" "I saw the trough," Ada screamed, tears finally breaking. "I saw the blood in the water." Amadi spat at her feet. "If I fall, it will be because you cursed the ground, witch." He climbed the ladder just to spite her. The crowd cheered his bravery. Ada was driven out with stones and insults, the sharp edge of a rock cutting her brow as she retreated into the safety of the trees. She sat by the forest stream, washing the blood from her face, praying she was wrong. But then the sky broke. A sudden violent deluge turned the market's red dust into a slick red soup. A few heartbeats later, the wail rose from the village, a jagged, high-pitched scream that tore through the rain. Amadi was dead, exactly as she had seen. Ada didn't feel powerful. She felt a cold, suffocating terror. She knew how Otumopo worked. They wouldn't see this as a warning ignored. They would see it as a prophecy enforced. Trembling, she leaned over one more time by the stream, looking back toward the village through her legs, desperate to see if she was next. But her vision didn't find herself. It flew over the huts and slammed into the golden gates of the palace. Through the gap of her knees, she saw the king. He wasn't on his throne. He was on his knees in a garden of black lilies, and standing behind him, the high priest Maduka was raising a blade made of frozen moonlight. The king wasn't just going to die, he was being sacrificed. And if the king fell, the straight world of Otumoko would drown in the blood of everyone Ada had ever known. The girl who was thrown away had a choice. Let the village that hated her burn, or walk into the lion's den to save a king who didn't even know her name. The path to the palace was not made for feet like Ada's. It was a steep, winding ribbon of polished stone, designed to make the commoner feel small and the crippled feel impossible. Every thump drag of her leg echoed against the high walls like a drum, counting down to a funeral. She could still feel the phantom spray of the rain from the market, and the copper taste of the carpenter's death was thick on her tongue. She wasn't just walking towards the king, she was walking towards the man who had ordered her abandonment 20 years ago. The guards at the outer gate didn't use spears to stop her, they used laughter. To them, Ada was a stray dog wandering out of the woods, her brow still crusted with the blood of the market stoning. The banana girl has lost her way, one jeered, crossing his arms. The market is down the hill, bent one. Or did you come to offer the king a dance? I must speak to the king, Ada said, her voice low but steady. There is a shadow in the garden, a blade in the dark. If he does not hear me, Otumopo will wake up without a crown. The guards' faces hardened. Mentioning the king's death was a crime punishable by the removal of the tongue. But before they could seize her, a calm, chilling voice drifted from the shadows of the archway. Let her pass. It was Maduka. He stood bathed in the silver light of the rising moon, his white robes so clean they seemed to glow with an unearthly light. He looked at Ada not with anger, but with the clinical curiosity of a man watching an insect crawl towards a flame. The girl who sees has come to the house of truth, Maduka said, his smile never reaching his eyes. Tell me, Ada, did you see the carpenter's brains on the stone before or after you pushed him with your mind? I pushed no one, Ada snapped, her heart hammering. I saw the truth upside down, and I have seen you, priest. I saw you in the garden of black lilies. I saw the moon blade in your hand. Maduka's smile didn't falter, but the air around him grew cold. He stepped closer, leaning down until his breath, smelling of frankincense and rot, brushed her ear. A girl who looks between her legs sees only death and delusions. If you speak these words to the king, he will not thank you. He will see a witch trying to divide his court. He will see a broken thing trying to break a kingdom. Then let him see me, Ada whispered. To her surprise, Maduka stepped aside, gesturing towards the inner sanctum. It was a trap, she knew it, but the vision of the king on his knees was a fire in her mind that she couldn't extinguish. The throne room was a cavern of gold and mirrors, designed to reflect the king's image 1,000 times over. At the center sat King Nosu, a man whose hair was the color of wood ash and whose eyes were clouded by the weariness of a long, unchallenged reign. He looked at Ada as she limped across the vast floor, her uneven steps sounding like an insult against the silence. Who is this? The king asked, his voice a deep roll of thunder. A messenger from the dead, my king, Maduka said, gliding into the room behind her. She claims to see your end. She claims I am the one to bring it. The king leaned forward, his gaze heavy. You are the girl from the forest, the one they say predicted Amadi's fall. I did not predict it, Majesty. I witnessed it before it happened, Ada said, dropping to her knees, not out of reverence, but because her leg could no longer support her. I have seen a vision of this palace in flames. I have seen a garden where the lilies turned black and a blade of frozen light at your throat. The man who stands beside you is not your shield, he is your shroud. The king looked at Maduka, then back at Ada. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical weight. Then the king began to laugh, a dry, hollow sound. My priest has been by my side since before you were a stain in the forest, girl. He interprets the stars. He reads the smoke. You look at the world through the gap in your knees like a plain child. I see the truth because I am willing to be low, Ada cried, her voice echoing off the mirrors. You sit too high to see the snakes at your feet. The king's laughter died. You speak of black lilies. There are no black lilies in Otumopo. My garden is filled with white jasmine. Your vision is as twisted as your bones. He gestured to the guards. Take her to the cells. If the sun rises and my garden is still white, she will be burned at noon for treason and witchcraft. As the guards grabbed her arms, Ada caught Maduka's eye. The priest didn't look afraid. He looked victorious. He leaned in one last time as they dragged her past. You made a mistake, Ada. You told the victim the date of his death, but you forgot that a king would rather die in comfort than live in debt to a freak. By trying to save the king, she had provided Maduka with the perfect scapegoat. When the tragedy finally struck, no one would look at the priest. They would all look at the girl in the cell who had prophesied it. That night, in the damp darkness of the palace dungeon, Ada curled into a ball. The stone floor was cold. Her hip was a screaming knot of pain. She knew she should stop. She should just close her eyes and wait for the fire. But the old woman's voice returned to her. The future is not a toy. It is a burden. With the last of her strength, Ada forced herself to kneel. She put her head to the cold, mossy floor and looked back through her legs at the small barred window that faced the palace gardens. The world flipped. The white jasmine didn't just turn black, it began to bleed. And through the gap in her knees, she saw the king again. But this time, the vision lasted longer. She saw the king's face melt away to reveal a mask. And beneath the mask wasn't King Nosu, it was a victim she hadn't recognized. She hadn't been seeing the king's death. She had been seeing a decoy. The real betrayal was much closer to home, and the fire she saw wasn't coming from Maduka's hand, it was coming from the very people she was trying to save. The dampness of the dungeon smelled of salt and ancient failures. Ada lay on the stone, her breath coming in shallow hitches. The king's dismissal had been a blade more precise than any Maduka could wield. It was the realization that even at the edge of death, the straight world would rather perish in its pride than be rescued by the bent. The hours crawled like insects across the floor. As the moon reached its zenith, a strange clawing scent began to drift through the iron bars of Ada's cell. It wasn't the clean, sharp sting of jasmine. It was heavy, metallic, and sweet, the smell of a wound that had been dressed in perfume. Ada forced her body to move. Every joint protested, a choir of agony that she had lived with since her first breath. She crawled to the high, narrow slit of the window and pulled herself up until her eyes were level with the palace garden. In the moonlight, the jasmine was a sea of ghost white, but Ada knew better. She slid back down, braced her hands against the cold masonry, and tucked her head. She looked through the gap of her knees, the world somersaulting into the violet-hued truth of the other side. The white jasmine didn't just turn black, it began to pulse. Through her legs, she saw the flowers drinking from the earth, their roots wrapping around something buried beneath the garden soil. The bleeding wasn't a metaphor. The ground was saturated with old blood, a foundation of secrets that fed the palace's beauty. Then she saw the figure. It wasn't Maduka yet. It was a woman, the Queen Mother. A woman the village spoke of only in hushed, terrified prayers. In the inverted world, she wasn't wearing her royal silks. She was draped in the skin of a hyena. She was pouring a dark, viscous liquid into the king's private cistern. The vision shifted. Ada saw the king she had seen before, the one on his knees. She looked closer at his face, upside down and distorted by the shimmering air of the future. The man on the ground wasn't King Wosu. It was a body double, a decoy dressed in the king's heavy robes. The real King Wosu had already been dead. He had been dead for days, his body hidden beneath the very jasmine he praised. The man sitting on the throne was an actor, a puppet controlled by Maduka and the Queen Mother to keep the kingdom from rioting while they drained the treasury dry. The sacrifice Ada had seen wasn't an assassination. It was a cleaning of the slate. Maduka intended to kill the fake king in front of the people, blame the forest witch for the curse, and then rise as the new savior regent of Otumopo. They aren't saving the kingdom, Ada whispered into the dirt. The door to her cell groaned open. 2 guards entered, their faces hidden behind bronze masks. They didn't speak. They grabbed her by her hair and her twisted leg, dragging her out of the dungeon and toward the garden. The pain in her hip was so sharp she nearly blacked out, but she clung to the vision. They threw her onto the grass, the jasmine garden. The sun is almost up, a voice purred. Maduka stood there, holding a ceremonial chalice. Beside him stood the man she had thought was the king, trembling slightly in his golden robes. You see, Ada, the flowers are still white. The king is still alive, Maduka said, kneeling beside her. He dipped a finger into the chalice and smeared a line of dark liquid across her forehead. You have failed, and because you failed, the people need a reason for their fear. They need to see the omen burn so they can believe the world is straight again. He's not the king, Ada rasped, blotting spit onto his white hem. Maduka's hand paused. His eyes narrowed, the mask of the saint slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal the predator beneath. It doesn't matter who sits on the chair, little bird. It matters who holds the green. The people believe he is the king, and they will believe you killed him. He signaled to the guards. They hauled the fake king toward the center of the garden, forcing him on his knees. The man began to sob, his royal facade crumbling. The very vision Ada had tried to save the kingdom was being staged as the evidence of her guilt. She was the director of her own execution. Look at the flowers, Ada, Maduka whispered, leaning over her as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon. Watch them turn. As the sun hit the jasmine, the chemical the Queen Mother had poured into the soil reacted. The white petals didn't just wilt, they began to absorb the dark liquid from the roots, turning a bruised, sickly black before the eyes of the gathered, terrified court. A curse, the priest shouted, his voice reaching the heights of the palace walls where the villagers had gathered to watch the witch's judgment. The forest thing has turned the king's garden to soot. She has poisoned the heart of Otumopo. The crowd roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated hate. Ada looked through the stalks of the blackened jasmine. She was on the ground, lower than anyone else. She saw the guards reaching for the torches. She saw the king weeping. And then she saw the twist she hadn't expected. In the inverted world of her vision, the black lilies were releasing in gas, a fine invisible mist that everyone was breathing. The priest wasn't just killing a decoy, he was poisoning the entire court. He didn't want to rule Otumopo, he wanted to empty it. He was the victim of his own madness, believing that only a purified land, one without people, without bent things, without life, was truly holy. Ada realized then, she wasn't there to save the king. She was the only one who could stop the priest from turning the entire village into a graveyard of perfect silence. She gripped a handful of the black, poisoned dirt. Her desire for legitimacy died in that moment, replaced by a cold, sharpened rage. She didn't want their love anymore. She wanted their survival, even if they hated her for it. I am the omen, Ada whispered to the dirt, and you haven't seen the end of my story yet. The torches were lit, their orange tongues licking the morning air, but the smoke rising from the black jasmine was different. It was heavy, sweet, and drifted like a physical weight over the lungs of the court. Ada watched as the noblemen and guards began to cough, their movements slowing, their eyes growing glazed. Maduka stood at the center of the rot, his arms raised, a man welcoming a silence he had spent a lifetime engineering. "Behold the purification," Maduka cried, though his own voice was beginning to rasp. "The crooked shall be burned, and the air shall be made clean." Ada didn't try to stand. She knew her leg would fail her, and she knew that in this world, power didn't come from standing tall. It came from seeing what others were too proud to look at. She rolled onto her stomach, ignoring the sting of the blackened petals against her skin, and tucked her head into the dirt one final time. She looked through her legs, and the world somersaulted. Through the gap, she didn't see the dying court or the weeping decoy king. She saw the structural flow of the palace itself, the way the cisterns beneath the garden connected to the great mountain spring that fed the entire village of Otumopo. The poison wasn't just in the air, it was flowing. In minutes, the water that the village children drank would become a liquid grave. Maduka wasn't just killing the court, he was straightening the world by ending it. Ada saw the lever, a heavy bronze sluice gate hidden beneath the king's throne, designed to flush the gardens in case of fire. If she could reach it, she could divert the poisoned water into the waste trenches before it hit the main well. But she was 40 paces away, and her leg was a useless weight of bone and pain. "The witch is dying," a guard shouted, his voice thick with the poison gas. He raised a torch to throw it onto the pile of wood where Ada lay. "Wait!" Ada's voice cracked like a whip. She didn't sound like a victim anymore. She sounded like the forest itself. She stared at the guard, not from her height, but from her inverted position, her eyes wide and terrifying in her upside-down face. "If you burn me, you burn the only hands that know where the antidote is hidden. Look at your priest. Look at his fingernails." The guard hesitated, glancing at Maduka. The priest's fingers had turned a bruised, necrotic purple, the same color of the jasmine roots. "She lies!" Maduka screamed, but he stumbled, his straight world finally beginning to tilt under the weight of his own toxin. In the confusion, Ada didn't walk. She crawled. She dragged her body across the blackened garden with a ferocity that made the gasping guards recoil. She was a creature of the earth, moving through the grime they feared. She reached the base of the throne just as the decoy king collapsed, his fake crown clattering across the stone. She found the hidden recessed ring of the sluice gate. Her fingers, calloused from years of digging for forest roots, gripped the bronze. "Ada, stop!" Maduka lunged for her, his white robes now stained with the soot of his own making. "You are the error. You are the thing that must be removed." "I am the only thing that sees you," Ada hissed. With a scream that tore from the deepest part of her lungs, she threw her entire weight against the lever. The bronze groaned, a sound of metal screaming against metal, and then thud. The ground beneath them shuddered. The sound of rushing water changed from a gentle trickle to a subterranean roar. The poisoned water vanished into the dark, diverted away from the village well, and into the deep, salt-dead ravines of the forest. The gas in the air began to thin as the water stopped feeding the jasmine. Maduka stood over her, his blade trembling. He looked around at his perfect silence, but it was being broken. The guards were gasping for clean air, standing up, looking at him with eyes that were finally clearing. The villagers on the walls weren't cheering anymore. They were watching their holy man try to murder a girl who had just saved their water. "You ruined it," Maduka whispered, his face twisting into a mask of pure, pathetic rage. It was going to be so quiet, so straight. He swung the blade. Ada didn't move. She didn't have to. A stone hit Maduka's wrist, then another. The villagers, the same ones who had mocked Ada's walk, they were the ones throwing them. They had seen the priest's fingers. They had smelled the death in the flowers. They realized that the bent one had been the only thing standing between them and a silent grave. The guards seized Maduka, dragging him away toward the very dungeon where he had locked Ada. He screamed about perfection until the darkness swallowed his voice. The sun rose fully then, casting a long, jagged shadow of Ada across the palace floor. The queen mother had vanished into the night, and the court was a ruin of broken silk and black petals. The decoy king crawled toward Ada, his hand reaching out in a plea for forgiveness. But Ada didn't take it. She used the throne to pull herself up. She stood on her one good leg, her bent one resting lightly on the golden dais. She looked out over the village of Otomopo. They were silent now, but it wasn't the silence of death. It was the silence of shame. They wanted to thank her. They wanted to name her a savior. They wanted to make her straight in their history books. But Ada knew the truth. She turned her back on the throne and the palace. She began the long, painful walk back down the stone ribbon toward the forest. Thump, drag, thump, drag. As she reached the forest edge, she stopped and looked back one last time. She didn't stand tall. She bent. She looked through her legs at the village of Otomopo. Through the gap, she saw the future. She saw them rebuilding. She saw them telling stories of the girl who saw upside down. But she also saw the seeds of the next betrayal, and the next, and the next. Because the world would always be a place of snakes and shadows, and people would always prefer a beautiful lie to a bent truth. Ada straightened her spine and stepped into the trees. She didn't need their palace. She had the forest, she had the old woman, and she had the only thing that mattered in a world of lies. She had her eyes. Now we have come to the end of this story. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and comment. Hit the subscribe button now and see you in my next video. Bye!